First roll call is 1964. In the report on which this broadcast is based, I tabulate the actual votes of all members of the National Congress on 20 key issues. Show how they stood to be counted when the roll was called on such vital matters as the Civil Rights Act, foreign aid, extending credit to communist nations, expanding the power of the federal bureaucracy, spending tax money to control American industries. Votes which I designate conservative are consistent with the established American principle of limited constitutional government. Votes designated liberal violate that principle. In this political year, all voters who care ought to know how their elected representatives and senators vote, not how they talk, but how they vote when the roll is called. The report on which this broadcast is based will give you that information. That is a summary of my report on First Roll Calls 1964. The full report after a message from my sponsor. The Constitution is a binding contract prohibiting the federal government from engaging in any activity, no matter how popular, not clearly authorized by a grant of power in the contract. When the federal government does something not authorized by the Constitution, government acts lawlessly. Unless government is kept within the bounds of constitutional authority, the people will have no guaranteed protection for their God-given rights. They will be at the mercy of any president who can persuade or bribe a majority of Congress to support his programs. Using this constitutional principle as a guide, I select and tabulate in my published report the most significant roll call votes made in the National Congress. The report on which this particular broadcast is based presents brief discussions of and shows how every United States Senator and Representative voted on 20 key issues. Votes in Congress which I designate conservative are consistent with the established American principle of limited constitutional government. Votes designated liberal violate that principle. For example, the International Development Association lends and gives American taxpayers' money to foreign governments and to foreign businesses. On January 20, 1964, the U.S. Senate passed a bill authorizing additional contributions of $312 million tax dollars to this fund. On May 13, 1964, the House passed the same bill. On December 16, 1963, the House approved a bill appropriating funds for foreign aid. The Senate approved the appropriations on December 30. 26 senators and 149 representatives cast conservative votes against this bill, which provided $3 billion tax dollars for foreign aid in the 1964 fiscal year. The Inter-American Development Bank also lends, sometimes gives, American tax money to governments and private businesses in Latin America. On August 19, 1963, the House, by voice vote, authorized an additional contribution of $461,760,000 tax dollars to the Inter-American Development Bank. On January 14, 1964, the Senate passed the bill by a roll call vote. 26 senators cast conservative votes against this giveaway of taxpayers' money. On February 7, 1964, the Senate, by a stand of 78 to 22, passed the Revenue Act of 1964, revising some internal revenue laws. This bill, sponsored by both Kennedy and Johnson administrations, was called a tax cut bill, though it actually raised taxes in several categories. This is not the Revenue Act that eventually became law. I tabulated the roll call on the defeated administration bill because a liberal vote for it meant, among many other things, willingness to increase the already outrageous powers of the Internal Revenue Service. On February 26, 1964, the Senate refused to send the Civil Rights Act to committee for proper hearings and study in accordance with Senate rules, thus placing a stigma of illegality on the bill because legislative procedures were not followed. 40 senators cast conservative votes for normal legislative processes under Senate rules. Imports of foreign beef, mutton, and lamb have severely damaged the American industry by depressing prices, though prices paid by American consumers have changed very little. This condition does not indicate the industry is too inefficient to compete in the free market. It reflects rather excessive burdens imposed on the American industry by government programs, many of which benefit foreign producers. The Senate on March 5, 1964, rejected an amendment to the 1964 Farm Bill, which would have imposed tariffs on foreign imports. Shortly after the Senate, in response to pressures from the administration, rejected this constitutional means of giving relief to American producers, Johnson administration spokesmen announced plans to provide relief through the unconstitutional means of using tax money to subsidize and control American ranchers. On March 6, 1964, the Senate voted down another amendment to the Farm Bill. This one would have prevented the Johnson administration from extending credit to any communist nation for the purchase of U.S. farm products. 34 senators cast conservative votes for stopping credit to communists. The Mass Transportation Bill, sponsored by the Kennedy administration and passed by the Senate in 1963, but still pending in the House, is thoroughly unconstitutional. Another dangerous step toward nationalizing, which means socializing, the transportation industry. The bill also has two sinister features which make it more than a double threat to states' rights in our constitutional system. The bill would permit the federal government to require collective bargaining, that is, monopolistic unionism, in transportation firms receiving federal funds. The federal government, by dispensing tax money, could nullify state right-to-work laws, which outlaw compulsory unionism. The Mass Transportation Bill defines urban area as an incorporated town and surrounding area, and requires urban areas which ask for federal funds to create metropolitan area planning committees to plan and dominate all transportation facilities in the area under the supervision of federal authority. This would be another step toward the creation of metropolitan areas to engulf existing cities and sprawl across county and state lines, each area to be governed by appointed experts under control of federal bureaucrats. Senator John Tower of Texas proposed amendments to the Mass Transportation Bill to mitigate these two particular evils. The Senate rejected both amendments. You ought to know how your two U.S. senators voted on these proposals. Before the Senate ratified the Test Ban Treaty in September 1963, Senators John Tower of Texas and Russell Long of Louisiana proposed that the Senate add an understanding to make clear that the treaty would not prevent the United States from using nuclear weapons in armed conflict. The Senate rejected the Tower-Long proposal. 65 U.S. senators voted against, 35 voted for, the proposal to preserve the nation's sovereign right to use its best weapons in war. On January 21, 1964, the House passed a bill authorizing a one-year, $45 million grant of federal tax money to aid public libraries. 115 representatives cast conservative votes against this unconstitutional use of tax money. The Davis-Bacon Act requires contractors doing work that is financed, partially subsidized, or insured by federal tax money to pay wages determined by the Secretary of Labor. On January 28, 1964, the House amended the Davis-Bacon Act, making it worse, expanding the Labor Secretary's authority to include fringe benefits as well as wages. Only 52 representatives cast conservative votes against this expansion of the illegal power of the bureaucracy. On May 15, 1963, the Federal Communications Commission made a new rule to limit the time that broadcast stations could devote to commercials, but later withdrew the ruling when there was strong protest in Congress. Nonetheless, the House on February 27, 1964, passed a bill to restrict the power of the FCC to make such illegal rulings. On March 4, 1964, the House voted to increase funds for the ludicrous, unconstitutional Peace Corps from $95 million to $115 million during fiscal 1965. Only 95 U.S. representatives cast conservative votes against this increase in funds. On February 27, 1964, the House, by a stand of 386 to 20, voted funds for the House Committee on Un-American Activities during fiscal 1963. The large vote for these funds shows the importance of public opinion. Many liberals who do not like the House Committee on Un-American Activities bowed to political expediency and voted the funds because they know the people want this committee continued. Only 20 representatives defied public opinion and voted against the funds, thus aligning themselves with a major communist objective, to abolish the House Committee on Un-American Activities. In the report on which this broadcast is based, I also tabulate the actual stand that every U.S. representative took on February 10, 1964, when the House passed the frightful, unconstitutional Civil Rights Act. All who order copies of this broadcast will get the tabulations showing the actual vote of all members of Congress on 20 such key issues as I have briefly discussed. This is information that needs to be widely distributed and widely used in this political year. When you find out how your elected representatives actually vote when they're called upon to take stands on roll call votes in Congress, and then by your voting, hold them accountable for how they vote, you will be on the way to improving the quality of our National Congress. Goodbye. God bless you. For a printed copy of this broadcast, send 25 cents to Dan Smoot, Dallas 14, Texas, and ask for 460. First roll calls 1964. 6 copies, $1.